So we thought we would have some closing comments today from a distinguished panel of folks. This is how you get people to come and then stay all day and listen, is you put them on a panel for some closing. And I'm actually really pleased of the mix of folks who were able to talk into doing this for us today. So we have Tom Nemeo, who you saw earlier, our regional ecologist, Rob Barnhart, who you also saw earlier, who's here as our R6 stewardship coordinator and here for our assistant director of timber. Deb Whitall is assistant director of planning. Michelle Mitchell, assistant director of recreation. Brad Washaw, acting assistant director of fire. You kind of see who I targeted here was a bunch of assistant directors. And then a couple of line folks, the Middle Fork District Ranger, Dwayne Bishop on the Willamette National Forest, and Kelly Lawrence, who's currently the acting deputy forest supervisor on the Willamette, but in her real job, she's a district ranger on the Okanagan Wenatchee. So help me just welcome these guys to the stage. Thanks. So I asked them each to just summarize a few key points of things that they heard through the day, maybe some nuggets they're going to take away with them, or things they would like to make sure they put a shiny point on for you guys as you take all this information back out to your home units. So let's start with Tom. We'll go right to left. Tom.
People hear me okay? So I had a really good conversation with Paul Hesburgh at lunch about the range variation work perhaps being too prescriptive, and also comments from some other PNW colleagues. And it certainly made me think, and I think in applied work, in applied science, we're always kind of straddling that boundary of doubt versus telling people what to do or giving them guidance. Because science is based on doubt, but management's based on decisions, and at some point you have to move forward and do something out there. So I'll continue to think about that, and I would encourage all of you as well as, to keep in mind that there's so much that we don't know, particularly about the future, but on the other hand, we have to collate all the information and at some point make a decision to move forward.
Thanks, Tom. I'm Deb Whitall, and I'm the Assistant Director for Planning. So what I did is captured a few what I considered to be thought-provoking comments or questions, so I'm just going to share. So forgive me for reading from my notes. I'm going to start with Paul Anderson. Paul said we need to consider biosocial cumulative outcomes at scale. Okay. Lisa Northrup said, we need to apply science at scale. And what does fire-managed system mean to people? And what's its effect on the landscape? Karen Bennett said, climate change exacerbates our need to be inquisitive. She explained the differences between land type associations and land form associations and how they set context for restoration and management. She left us with this question: do we really need 40% canopy cover everywhere? Paul Hesburgh said, where do we need to go as a result of climate change and fire exclusion? He reminded us that we can't go backwards because climate change is hastening fire effects on the forest. Gordy Reeves enlightened us that conversations occur between riparian and forested areas, and if we listen, we can accommodate inherent variability. He honestly admitted that a conservation emphasis versus reaching for multiple objectives, whoa, there's a slip, is inherently value-based and is about level of risk. Dee Olson highlighted that headwaters are where the water is, and that modeling into 2085 shows us that these headwaters will be shrinking. Juliana Jenkins reminded me of the importance of humility with her overarching answer, it depends. Michelle Steen Adams said, Humans have appropriated 24% of ecosystem function, and therefore we need to consider the cultural landscape. I'm almost done. She went on to emphasize the importance of developing trust and respect with Indigenous peoples and First Nations, whose cultural practices sustain deep connections to the land. Summer Kemp Jennings posed an important question: what is natural? And reminded us words matter when she said, our language is relative and situational. The more clarity, the better off we are in gaining understanding and the potential for action. Jane Curtis circled back to landscape analysis because she said it helps us meet people where they are. The Rigdon Dry Forest Plan focused on the question, what functions do we want this landscape to continue to provide? And James Dickinson added that the landscape analysis objectives became the purpose and need statements, literally word for word. Finally, Amanda and Dave shared the importance of monitoring, where I'd like to put a little plug in here. So here's a couple of opportunities I'd like you all to consider. This is around improving adaptive management. So the 2012 planning rule requires forests to complete biennial monitoring evaluation reports every 2 years. These reports are intended to share monitoring results and provide interpretation to inform the public about how we are doing with implementing forest plans. So what I want to do is challenge all of you to use the production of these reports as a tool to improve our adaptive management process. And finally, a word on climate smart decision making. So since 2010, R6 has been partnering with PNW to complete climate change vulnerability assessments across the region. I want to challenge all of us to use these assessments, use the data and the tools that were developed in this regional climate program to inform your local restoration efforts and evaluate current land use allocations in light of our future forest planning efforts. Thank you.
I am not going to beat that. Couple things that I heard today that resonated well with me. First, hug your ecologist. So Jane already gave her a hug, and Steve, I'll get to you in a minute, okay? When I first got to the Middle Fork District, almost 10 years ago, Jane and I engaged on the Rigdon project almost right away, and she immediately started connecting the dots for me and helping me understand that landscape, and then filled out a lot of questions. And so I just say I got a lot of value out of that, and that propelled us to where we are today. So some other things I really liked hearing today is do what's right for the landscape. And then I guess my question is, so whose definition of right? And so I think that's really important for us as agency employees and also our stakeholders, is our job has really changed. And it's really to kind of dig deeper, understand our landscapes, and really understand what is right for that landscape. It's not just going out there and kind of just grinding the NEPA handle and getting 3,000 acres out the other side. I think it's really important for us to kind of dig deep in that. And by doing that, dig deep with our collaboratives. Especially, listening to the Blue Mountain a little bit ago, and their efforts, and I've heard other conversations today about working with your collaboratives. Again, I think that's, we have a changed paradigm. I think working with our collaboratives is how we're going to get work done, how we're going to accelerate restoration, how we're going to do that big, heavy lift. And shying away from that conversation, if we're not going to convene that conversation, then who will? And so I think it's really important that we own that, and step up to the plate, and if not, make room for somebody else to do that, because I think that's really, really important. Let's see, what else today? As a segue, maybe I'll use this as a time a little bit to talk about the Rigdon project. One of the things that we talked about, and I think it was back to a question that was on this side about, you got to go slow to go fast. And that really worked. When we started moving forward with the Rigdon project and the landscape analysis process, we wanted to have informed dialogue, informed conversation so we could move forward on the project. So we spent the first year and a half, even before the FLAD, really going out. I believe we had 16 or 18 field trips with our collaborative. One field trip would be all about fisheries. The next trip, and these are all-day trips, about wildlife, and then about soils, and then about geology. And so what we did, and it was really fun for me as a line officer to actually watch those meetings where people, our collaborative is very well represented, has a very broad representation from the conservation groups to the timber industry, and as well as a lot of the recreation community. And they started understanding what we were talking about. When we're talking about dry mixed conifer restoration, if we would have just laid out a proposed action, I probably would have been shot and tarred and feathered 10 times over. But then all of a sudden, our meetings started talking about what does forest resiliency look like, and what is landscape ecology, and how are these interconnected? And so we spent, like I said, I think 16 field trips and 6 roundtable sessions talking, and I call it softly weaving together landscape ecology with these people that's not their dialogue. And so in the end, when we got to then building the landscape analysis, we had a really informed collaborative. And so all of a sudden we could dive deep on a conversation and not lose anybody. So again, I think to get to the question, and I forget who asked it earlier, did that really facilitate us to go fast? And I would say where we are on the Rigdon landscape right now, we're proposing very heavy-handed treatments on this landscape to really change the course of this fire-prone landscape that's had fire suppression for 120 years. And so we could have never had that if we didn't really slow down on the investment. So that's my little 2 cents on that.
So Brad Wash, I'm the acting assistant fire director for integration, and within SORO we cover both BLM and Forest Service. And my day job is actually one of the deputy state FMOs back in Utah for the BLM. So one of the comments I heard was fire or fuel should be not just about mowing down wildlife habitat. And when we look at fuels treatments, they should be considered multiple objectives, but we got to consider place and time. And there are places where, if you are in the WUI and the interface, it may be less about those wildlife habitats and more about the WUI and the interface. But there are also the landscapes where we're looking at fire resiliency outside of that WUI, where we should be looking at things from a multiple objective standpoint. And again, relating back to the collaboration, at least within Utah, with our watershed restoration initiative and our Utah Cat Fire, we're getting at least a 1-to-1 match financially, and sometimes 5-to-1 match in those collaborations that we do with them that do have a wildlife benefit, and I think that's a success. And one thing we're seeing is, over the last 13 years, we've only had 1 year where we've actually had more acres burned in wildfires than we have had in treatments within Utah, and that's in part we've completed over 1 million acres about 2 years ago, so I think we're up to 1.25 million acres of treatment on BLM land. So we're actually, we've asked Utah State to look into that to see if it's just by chance or if it's because treatment effectiveness and fires are starting in areas that have been treated and it's just that one tree fire. There's the fire resiliency side of things, or fuels treatments are being used to be able to stop fires from causing further damage. If that's the case, then we're trying to keep the fires from becoming large. Another comment I heard is what we do in the terrestrial landscapes impacts the aquatic ecosystems. And I can think of a number of examples where that's been a success. Had a project called the Marshall Draw Project. It was about a 3-year project, I think around 6,000 acres in a watershed. And it was basically pinyon juniper encroaching in on the sagebrush. And after the 3 years of treating that, and again, it was a collaborative project, and we were able to, you'd see functioning water systems, seeps that were flowing, creeks that were just perennial creeks flowing year-round, and that sort of thing. So, and before going to Utah, I spent 5 years in Medford, and I can think about when the National Fire Plan came into being, we were able to start doing things on pretty much a watershed level. But one thing we were having were what we were calling riparian wicks, and basically treating everything except for the riparian areas to try to follow a direction that we're getting from NOAA fisheries and that. And with that, we had a major concern that we were going to get starts at the bottom of these riparian areas that would run right up to the ridgetop around our fuels treatments that we were doing. And with that, took the 2 fish biologists that we had on the resource area. I was with the BLM down there, and had them go through the 130, 190 training. And they actually, John and Dave were in their 40s, but they went out with a 20-person crew, got a good understanding for fire, and then the next prescribed burn we came out with, John's like, why are we stopping here? It's like, because you won't let us go into that riparian area, and that's why we've got the fire line around. And he's like, give me the torch. And so he took it in there and did a light understory burn in that riparian area, and helped us with that problem. But I think having a better understanding for what we're dealing with in the fuels rain is important. I'll leave you with 2 things. One is a quote I heard last week is, the chief cause of today's problems are solutions to our previous problems. And I think that weighs pretty high. And with that, a couple years ago, I was at a fire conference, and Norm Christensen from Duke University, he's a fire ecologist, had this quote, and he basically took the 10 fire orders and made them into 10 fire management orders. But his last one was, you only think you know what you're doing, be humble, manage it adaptively. And I think we need to do that when we look at fire on the landscape. And one last plug, Stephen Pine, he's a fire historian. He wrote he's done a number of fire survey books. And his last book, his 9th book, has a chapter in there on the Pacific Northwest. And we're actually going to do a webinar with him this Thursday. It's in conjunction with the Northwest Fire Science Consortium. So if you're interested, look up Northwest Fire Consortium. And it's, I think, 1 o'clock on Thursday with him.
Awesome. So, hey, y'all. My name is Michelle Mitchell. I'm Assistant Director for Recreation, Wilderness, Wild and Scenic Rivers, Heritage, and Trails, all the good fun stuff. And I don't get to hang out with this crowd here very often. You guys are new faces to me for the most part, so I'm going to take a quick minute just to introduce myself, which will also help with some of the emphasis that I want to leave you with here today. I am a biologist by training, and I'll tell you, not just any biologist. Early in my career, I was quite prideful about my the way that I self-titled myself, which was combat biologist. I spent years out to save the world, and the ecological and biological world, especially our wild places, from people. I spent years failing. I shifted to move from being a combat biologist to move towards being a recreation manager, and have since then spent years saving the world with people, not from, and have found it to be an incredibly successful tactic. And so it's with that lens that I want to leave you guys with some of the things that I heard today. Place, setting, connectivity, they matter. Scales of interest, they matter. Ranges of variability, it matters. And so, to quote Meg Ryan, yes, yes, yes. We got some Gen Xers out there, whoop, whoop. This is the language of modern recreation management. This language that you guys are using as you think about how to approach landscape ecology is the very language of modern recreation management. And so I really love, Kelly, was it you, the elongated NEPA triangle with the pre-planning side on the end? I love that, because here's what we didn't hear today. We didn't hear very much about the science of archaeology, and I want to add to your hug list. Go home and hug your archaeologist and acknowledge that we've been doing a heck of a lot of terrible Well, you know what? We haven't been doing terrible science because we haven't been doing science, you guys. We've been flagging and avoiding archaeological sites for a heck of a long time. What that means is we've come to the point to understand there might be something there, and then we run away. What you're missing out on as landscape ecologists by not having taken the time to do real science of archaeology is you're missing a heck of a lot of information about the history and prehistory of that landscape that can help inform what was there before human contact or before European contact. The science of archaeology is an incredibly missed tool in our toolbox of landscape ecology and restoration. So go home, hug your archaeologist, and think about elongating that pre-planning to go beyond just flag and avoid and do some actual science on your units. The other thing I want to leave you with is incorporating existing and future land use into your plans. We didn't talk enough about, I won't say we didn't talk at all about, but we didn't talk enough about recreation and land use. And I will let you know that your recreation staff, you can add them to your hug list as well, we are out there trying to figure out how to be awesome in the places that matter most, and we're using very similar language in our recreation planning as to what you're using in your ecological landscape planning. We have an opportunity to be incredibly powerful together. We can merge the restoration economy with the recreation economy and leverage the power of place and sense of place and the connection of humans to place to create an army of constituents for the resource that you would like to restore and that we too would like to restore. Many of us are former biologists. And so I'll leave you with that thought and challenge. Incorporate and integrate and think about others that could be on your team that aren't here yet today.
Okay, thank you. I'm Kelly Lawrence. I'm the district ranger for Natchez up on the Okanagan Wenatchee. And temporarily hanging out with the folks on the Willamette, which are also awesome, where awesome really matters. I guess I would say that I'm a recovering social scientist. And so for me, you folks are a little bit scary. And it's a lot to take in. And to quote Carrie, one person knows how to apply the science, and maybe no one else does. So what do we do with that when the tools are so complicated and you have a team of folks that know something totally different than that person who's running your model? How are you successfully working in that environment? 20 years ago, we talked about interdisciplinary teams. And interdisciplinary teams weren't people that sat across the hall from each other. They were folks that actually worked together to integrate what they were doing. And we heard some awesome examples of that. And we still, in this region, have what was coined the stapler effect, where you take your specialist report and you staple it to someone else's and you put it out in your EA. That is a reality still. So I commend everyone here that was talking about, what did you guys talk about on the Middle Fork? We told our stories to one another. It became a learning environment, safe for exploring. I mean, who was it that was sitting behind me that said, what's an FMZ? There's all kinds of things like that in our work. We have exceptionally honorable work that we do. People are exceptionally smart and gifted, but our work is no good unless we're telling other people about it, unless other people can understand it, unless we're selling it to those people who have a home range far larger than any large carnivore. The human component of what we do is everything. It's everything. There are values, beliefs, and attitudes that affect everything we do. There are patterns across the landscape. There are hard physical attributes to what folks are doing. it is never ending. If our teams don't have social scientists or recreation planners or some kind of economist on them, we may be really missing the boat. And that's what I didn't hear today very much of. I applaud Michelle for being the one person who came and represented the whole of social science, all the anthropologists, all the archaeologists, all the economists, all the sociologists, all the psychologists. There is so much science around landscape planning for humans and making sure that we are incorporating the needs, the desires, and the interests of our publics. So I just hope that we will think in the future about how does our organization align with the job that we have to do. And if humans are such a huge component of what we do, why is our organization so shy in people who know the science of managing people?
Thanks. Now that I've gone through the panel here, I'm the last one, and definitely drank a little bit of water before that last presentation, so I'll keep this pretty quick. One of the things, or there's a couple things that I wanted to go through and reflect on with regards to this workshop, and there's several things that was told to me by an old ecologist that retired some years ago, Tom Atzett. And one of the big things that he talked about was always time and space, and it depends. It's one of the key factors when we go through and look at these landscapes. There's so many different variables that we're assessing. There's so many things that we look at. It's always to keep in mind that when we go through and we take a look at owl corridors and other pieces and look at the fire impacts, and then start talking a bit more about other pieces, other aspects that we go through and do analysis on, it's just to make sure that we don't go through and put an endpoint. We're not going to a desired treatment that is the exact thing that we want to see in that landscape for the eternity of that project. That's what we're looking at is looking at the dynamics that shape these landscapes. Whether it be cultural, whether it be abiotic type of situations, we're taking a look at that, and that's what we're doing our analysis on. So just to kind of keep that into context, because sometimes we get to the point, we get to an end of a project, and we go, woohoo, we're done. But we're not. There's a lot of things that we have that take up the later parts of these projects. One of the other things that I wanted to talk a little bit about, and it came up in the NEPA talk, and it was one of the things that really resonate with me, and it's the fact that we have such a changing workforce. We have so many folks that are currently either retiring or close to retirement. We have many young foresters and other specialists that are coming into the agency. And it's really trying to figure out how we go through and pair some of the folks that are out here that have really great experience into folks that are just coming in, that mentorship piece. Being able to get folks paired up to be able to learn from them, to have some on-the-ground trainings with them. I think that's one of the key pieces that we go through and we take a look at and we go, well, 20 years ago we did it this way. Well, that's great as long as that person's still there, and that they have that knowledge still shared with those other folks. One thing that I did want to talk about is also, think about all the different authorities we have currently at our disposal. No time have I ever seen where the Forest Service has a tremendous amount of authorities to be able to look at all these partnerships and collaborations. We've got good neighbor authority. We've got our stewardship agreements. We've got our stewardship contracting. All these things are things that we need to go through and take a look at when we're trying to get a collaborative put together. Some of these have been used in some of the projects that were shown here today, but it's also just to remember that you do have those abilities. And some of those abilities, especially with regards to state, allow you to go through and set up monitoring, or even contracting NEPA out. So when we're going through and taking a look at some of these things, or looking at these project areas across the landscape, take a look at how we can go through and use these authorities to be able to go through and help us. Stewardship agreements, the ability to go through and leverage for funding, financial funding, to have those folks to be your advocate when it comes down to these financial asks and reply dues that are there. Those are big things, because what we look at is we look at how much budget we get, how much timber product value is out there, and then we're left with, we got about 20,000 other acres that we still need to do something in. And so it's being able to get those leveraged monies out there within these landscapes. So good neighbor authority, stewardship, forest products modernization. This is the other thing that's really unprecedented at our time right now, is the fact that every single handbook that is in the 2400 handbook series is right now going through review. We're going through each one of the handbooks in each chapter, and we're updating each one of those handbooks. So some of the handbooks, for example, cell administration, we've got 1973 direction that's in that handbook. It hasn't been updated since then. We're going through for each handbook and reviewing that and updating it for everybody, so that as we move forward, we have current directions more aligned with our current science and our current situation. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, because I know that folks have heard forest products modernization quite a bit, and it's been thrown out a lot. But to understand some of the concepts of what's behind that, as far as being able to go through and have the ability to work through our areas and to be able to have it laid out to where we understand the direction it's coming down. So I just wanted to throw those few things out. And again, I'm acting for Allie Warren right now, and Allie's gave me this opportunity to sit at this panel, and I really appreciate it. By the way, this is my 3rd week on the job, so just wanted to throw that out there too.
So help me thank the whole panel, you guys. Appreciate that.